every day, and she drops off already. So I see her daily. That's like a mini quiz. Say tell the brand or tell Molly. You want to spread a rumor? Tell Molly.
Sorry to turn my back.
Morning. Morning. So we're going to invite you to, if you can't see because of these darn pillars holding up this 1890 behemoth of a church, please move your chairs to where you can see and be comfortable. This is on Facebook Live. We have a microphone in case you have a hard time hearing. Just let us know. Just go, and we'll get that set up for you. I'm Steve Onsman. I'm the pastor here. I'm so glad you're all here. This is really important. I know it's the Friday before Holy Week and Passover, and it's Ramadan, and you can blame our speaker. Not for those holidays, just for being here now. But we're so glad we can piggyback with Albright and bring him in here. So I have the important part to say the bathrooms are down that hallway. There's a women's room, and then if you go to the hall and turn left, there's a whoever room. And if you get desperate and somebody's in both, we have the office is sort of that way. So you can give a bathroom in there if you need to use it. We have Wi-Fi, a guest network if you need it. Please just log on, there's no password. The schedule for today is we're going to have some discussion, some information. We're going to go until about 11:30, and then we'll take a little break, and we'll have lunch from noon and discussion then as well. So if you pre-registered for lunch, it's being provided by Cafe Esperanza, which is a pay what you can afford ministry in the community. We will be taking, all this is paid for, and I'm going to tell you who did that. But if you want to put money in the basket, all that is collected will go to Cafe Esperanza, every cent. So if you'd like to make a little donation or a big donation, your house, that's fine. Just make sure you put it in the basket. Okay? And we are recording it. You may use the recording once it's up on YouTube. You may use it if you'd like. It's going to be 2 hours and then 1 hour, so it's long. But if you want to use it in church for something, you can just go on our YouTube page and use it. Please do, or Facebook. Okay, so while this is primarily being funded by this congregation, Calvary, we got generous donations from the West Berks Mission District of the Lutheran Church, or the ELCA, right? Do I have to say all the letters? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. From Emmanuel United Church of Christ in Shillington, thank you. From Diane Connor, Temple Oheb Shalom, we have very generous donations. Bill Bloomer, thank you. Made a donation. We have another anonymous, and Betsy and Charlie Majewski also made donations. So we want to thank them very much. And anytime you want to get up, help yourself to coffee and stuff there. We'll try to keep the things filled, but we're volunteers here, so give us a break. All right. So. Let me do the introduction. Robert P. Jones is the president and founder of the Public Religion Research Institute, PRRI. By the way, I've been using that for years before I met him, so it's excellent if you need to use it. And the author of 2 wonderful books. You can get them online. We don't have copies here. I thought we would. We don't. Books have won the 2021 American Book Award. Dr. Jones writes regularly on politics, culture, and religion for The Atlantic, Online, NBC Think, and other outlets. He is frequently featured in major national media such as CNN, MSNBC, NPR, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and others. He also won the 2019 Rawmeyer Award. I can't pronounce that. In religion, is it right? Okay. And also just writes all the time about issues around white supremacy, American Christianity. He holds a PhD in religion from Emory University, an MDiv from Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, Bachelor of Science in Computing Science and Mathematics from Mississippi College. He was selected by Emory University's Graduate Division of Religion as Distinguished Alumnus of the Year in 2013, Mississippi College's Mathematics Department as Alumnus of the Year in 2016. He serves on the National Program Committee for the American Academy of Religion, as a past member of the editorial boards for the Journal of the American Academy of Religion and Politics and Religion, a journal of the American Political Science Association. Before he founded PRRI, Robbie worked as a consultant and senior research fellow at several think tanks in Washington, D.C., and was an assistant professor of religious studies at Missouri State University. I think you're really going to enjoy this. Robbie.
I am amazed to see everyone here Friday morning. Before Holy Week, before Passover, Ramadan. It is a tough time. So I think may unfortunately be an indication of the importance of this topic to us in the country and today. And so I'll tell you a little bit about myself. And I've divided the morning up into kind of three moments. The first moment, I really wanted to give you all a chance to talk to each other at tables. We're going to take just a little bit of time before I jump in and kind of give a formal presentation on kind of what the data tells us today about how big a problem and a threat this movement of white Christian nationalism is to the country, to our congregations, etc. But we'll have a little time together to do that. Then I'm going to make a kind of more formal presentation to kind of orient us. We just released this big national public opinion survey at the Brookings Institute just about a month ago. So this is data pretty hot off the presses that will give us a good lay of the land. And then we'll kind of close out the time. We'll have a chance to do some question and answers there, and then we'll close out the time kind of back at the tables, thinking about what we can do about this problem that we're facing. But I'll just say a couple things about myself so you'll know kind of from whence I come. Steve mentioned the last two books have been kind of a journey that I've been on, and so when I give talks, it is in some ways like an invitation to go on this journey with me. So I grew up Southern Baptist in Jackson, Mississippi, and my siblings and I were actually the first people not to live in either Bibb County or Twiggs County, Georgia, in our family in 200 years. Right, so my family really goes back both sides, my mother's family and my father's family, to Macon, Georgia, and one of those two counties surrounding Macon, Georgia. Last night at Albright, I talked a little bit about this, but I'll just give you a quick recap for those who weren't here. I have in my family, my mother's side has passed down one object all the way down from the early 1800s. It has actually gone mother to daughter, and I was the first non-female to get to receive this. It's the family Bible that was printed in 1815. And it was the Bible that our family had as they moved from Virginia down to Georgia in the early 1800s. And so some of you may have some of these old family Bibles about yay thick. And between the Old Testament and the New Testament in that Bible, there are these genealogical pages. Actually, I think we don't need that.
Are you okay?
For now. Yeah. We'll do the slides till the second part of it. And there are multiple generations of my family written down, births, deaths, marriages, major events there. And so this is like one of the prized possessions. When I went to seminary, my mother gave it to me when I went to seminary. And that document, it's now on my study bookshelf. It's one of the most prized possessions we have. But as I was doing genealogical research to kind of fill in from what we had in that Bible, I came across another document from my mother's side of the family, and it was an estate settlement. Internet was from the same year. The Bible, the original owner, my direct ancestor, my sixth great-grandfather, his name was Pleasant Moon. It was a British name, a male British name. We have multiple of those in our family, and he was named for his uncle. And I found the estate settlement of his uncle also named Pleasant Moon, and it was from the same year the Bible was published, 1815. And so you may have seen these in these kind of old recording books. They're handwritten and they kind of oxidized, brownish ink. And they list like literally everything in the household, right? So it lists, one bay mare, one kitchen table and 6 chairs, 1 feather bed, 6 head of sheep. Like it just goes on, 1 rifle, all the way down. And among those things listed, you probably know where this is going, right? Were 4 human beings, right? And they were listed by name with a dollar amount out beside them, just in line with all these other objects that were in the estate sale. So it was like a woman named Naomi at $800, Bird, a boy, at $150, right? And what was striking about that is that my family was not the Gone with the Wind, wealthy plantation owner class. You probably think of us as kind of yeoman farmer class, just subsistence farmer class. We had 200 acres, and the entire value, when I added it all up, if you translate to today's dollars, the entire value of that estate was $50,000 in today's money, right? So not a wealthy family. 70% of the assets were in those 4 human beings, right? And this is, again, not from the kind of the Gone with the Wind, Scarlett O'Hara, stuff, but from kind of basically a family subsistence farm. And the way that farming economy worked was within the enslaved labor for human beings. So part of kind of what set me on this journey is having these 2 documents sitting on my desk side by side, right? This family Bible, right, with all of this history and all of this kind of things we're proud of. And by the way, down through the years, there are plenty of Baptist pastors. The founder of Dexter Memorial Baptist Church was one of my ancestors, right? One Methodist minister thrown in, but for the most part, Baptist, all the way down. And yet, this other document, this is a single page. And I remember just feeling like, as these 2 documents sat on my desk, that single page began to have as much or more weight as this big, thick Bible did, right? And just kind of how do I think about my family's journey, and who we are writ large. And the other, I guess, little note to say is that the denomination I grew up in, the Southern Baptist Convention, many of you may know this, but when I grew up mostly in Jackson, thinking about what that first word Southern meant in Southern Baptist Convention, it was just a compass point to me, right? It meant, we were down here and not up there, right? So there were Baptists in the north and Baptists in the south, and this is who we were. And it wasn't really until I got to seminary where I finally had a Baptist history professor tell it to me straight, right? That, actually the denomination was founded in 1845 explicitly to make owning other human beings compatible with the gospel of Jesus Christ. That was the point of the denomination. That was the divide. And by the way, the Methodist split in 1845 as well, with the same issue in the northern and southern. And virtually every Protestant denomination, before it was all said and done, split. Every white Protestant denomination, Presbyterians, Episcopalians, most of them mended things back in sometime in the 20th century. The Baptists did not, right? Today, the Southern Baptist Convention, the one formed to make slaveholding compatible with Christianity, is still the largest expression of Protestant Christianity in the country today, right? So that is still the largest over 14 million members. At its height, it was 16 million. It has declined over the last decade, but that's still, if you ask what is the biggest expression of Christianity, it is that version that was premised on that idea, right? That's still the large one today. So that's sort of like the world I come out of. And as I've kind of been on this journey of kind of reckoning that history and trying to, I'm an academic and a little bit of an AWOL academic, but an academic nonetheless. And so what do I have? What tools do I have at my disposal? Well, I have that training, that history that I can draw on. But in my day job at PRRI, the Public Religion Research Institute, we sit on a trove. We probably interview about 100,000 Americans a year in national public opinion surveys, right? So we have all of this data on what Americans actually think today about a whole range of issues. What I did in the last book, the title was White Too Long, The Legacy of White Supremacy in American Christianity, was really trying to pull these things together. My own family story, the history that I kind of know from academic training, and then the data. What does the data tell us about how prevalent these ideas of white supremacy are still within American Christianity today? And all that is to say, to set the table for this morning, we're going to be talking about one very specific expression of that, and that is this idea of white Christian nationalism. Now, I want to say that this is a fairly new label for a very old problem, right? And so we'll be talking about what it looks like in this contemporary expression of Christian nationalism. But at root, it is a problem that has been with us before the founding of the Republic, right? There is these kind of dual traditions in American civic life, and they basically are, one of them says, it goes way, way back, that this country was founded to be a Christian nation, right? And even more specific to that, what it essentially says is that this country was intended to be a kind of promised land for European Christians. Right? That's what God designed this continent to be, was have European Christians, the Western European Christians, come over and sort of own it, right? And it was designated to be theirs. Like that's the idea. The other competing thing, right, is the idea that this country is a pluralistic democracy with freedom of religion for all. There's no religious test for office. Like that other kind of tradition is there too. But one of the things that I think we're dealing with today is that we have never fully chosen between these two traditions in this country. We have let both of them live all the way down. And there's been a way in which white Christians in particular could finesse this problem by paying lip service to religious liberty and the separation of church and state, knowing full well that they had such a demographic lock on power and culture that it didn't really matter. Right? But one of the things I think why we're seeing this flare up in our lifetime, in our time, is that the country has changed enough that it's no longer really a safe presumption, if you're white and Christian, that demographics are on your side, right? That you have just this overpowering demographic advantage. And in fact, I think one of the most significant statistics that we need to know of today is this one, is that that we no longer live in a majority white Christian country. And that has only become true in the last 20 years, right? So if you think about kind of why our politics looks the way it is and why the fights are really less over policy and more over identity, and specifically, who is a real American, right? Who is this country for? Who owns this country, right? Those kinds of questions are what is really dividing this country, and it's about race and religion at the end of the day. These bigger questions are there. But just to kind of put a fine point on it, if we go back just to the early 2000s, even as late as Barack Obama's run for presidency in 2008, the country was still majority white and Christian. So if you add up all white non-Hispanic Christians, Catholic, Protestant, non-denominational, etc., they made up 54% of the country in 2008, as recently as 2008. By the time we get the 2016 election, with the rise of Donald Trump, that number had shrunk to 47. Right? So we had gone, during the presidency of our first African American president, we had shifted from being a majority white Christian country to the one that was no longer a majority white Christian country. That number today is 42%, right? So we continue to kind of drop in terms of kind of white Christian majority. And I think it is that loss and that change that's really set off. I sometimes kind of half joke that, you know, one way of just describing the milieu in our culture today is like the great white Christian freakout moment, right? It's kind of what we're seeing in many ways as this country has shifted. So I just want to set the table with that and to say that we'll be talking about white Christian nationalism, but it is this very old problem that we have never dealt with, right? And it is coming back to roost with us today because every generation finds a way to kind of kick that can down the road and finesse it. But I do think we are finally going to have to answer the question, are we in this country a white Christian country, and that is who we claim to be, or are we a pluralistic democracy, right? Where every religion stands on equal footing. We're going to have to answer that question. And I think that is one of the things that we're wrestling with this rise of a movement trying to reclaim this old idea that this country is and should be a white Christian country. So with that introduction, what I want to do is just kind of let you stay at your tables and just have a very brief conversation. But what I'd like to do is have you think a little bit about how this has shown up, not just on CNN, but here at home. So how have you encountered this idea, right, that the country is a white Christian country, should be a white Christian country, this reclamation kind of movement? How's it shown up either in your congregation, in your neighborhood, so like somebody's got a sign in their yard, in your community, and if it's news, it's local news in your schools. Like where does this kind of show up? Book bans, what's being kind of kicked out of schools, those kinds of things. But take a little bit of time, and I'm going to put a little timer here. I think there's about 6 people at each table. But if you can each take like no more than 3 minutes, I'm going to give you like a 2-minute kind of get organized, but then I'm going to hit my timer, and it'll go off at 3-minute intervals. And that means if you're talking, it's time to stop. Let somebody else talk. So I'll have it on the mic here, so you'll hear it. But just go one at a time, and you can think of just what I want to really, the idea is to bring it into the room and make it close to home and personal. Right? So how have you seen this shown up? All right, so go ahead and get organized. Do a quick introduction of yourself as you talk, and I'll set the timer here.
There's a pad. Hey everybody, there's a pad and a pen at every table. If you want to take notes, there's also sticky notes if you want to make a note for yourself.
I live in Wyoming, and I lived there. I grew up actually. And I moved there. There's many places, but last place I was outside of Wyoming was New York City. So I love New York City. I was there. Now you went a while. Condé Nast, publishing not just that in particular travel magazine, they only put a lot of magazines and newspapers. And I loved it. Well, I got divorced and I moved back. I'm missing I've always been politically motivated, politically minded, and so whenever there was an election, I had my signs out 5 or 6 months and walked about it. And somebody would always come by, and I came tonight to take my sign. I had to imagine who that was, and what the type of person that was. But I never met him, I never saw him, never heard anybody else say that he had. Maybe it's but what I did was I bought 10 signs. So they'd come by, they'd back the next day. I was there. This went on and on for years. I got remarried and we moved up the hill, Garfield Street, went to Dolphins. And the same thing happened maybe the first year or so. But my little habit of persistence, dogged announcement, when I was stuff. I don't know if there was some old guy, cranky old guy, who died. Nobody takes my signs anymore. And I think that may have had to do with it. I did see some kids marauding, just mischievous. But, so I come at all of this with the perspective of persistence, vigilance, and trying to address any of these issues in a local, spiritual way. Persistence now. It's not going to be a one-time issue. It's not going to be we're never going to fix it and end it. It's just we've got to keep those signs up. But as far as and that to me bigotry, but this person had decided that I'm a Democrat. They will not be a Democrat in order to say, even though there are people yeah, that's what they want you to think. Well, in our one, but it's leaving. You know, on the west end of Reading, about how many I used to live on the other side of the Greenwich there. I saw a house mixed up on the my first wife. This was our whole church. What's your last name? Arthur Nail.
I like what you said, his own education, but not understanding.
I'm gonna ring her off, and that was 3 minutes.
And I think a lot of
Third in command or the entire corporation. Well, I don't remember that name. And he may have been associated with the magazine. But I didn't actually do the magazine by myself. I just the editor.
we don't have to give land back.
I have to say, I have very bad hearing. I do have my hearing aids. I do have my hearing aids in, but I also hear everybody fine. It is. It's watch the movie. My wife and I watching the movie. Genius. It's kind about Thomas Wolfe. He always had his hat on. My wife's name was Gwen, and Gwen said, "Why do I always hold that?" So they don't tell you that in the movie, but I looked it up.
So where I've seen this idea of the country should be white Christian is I knew of the detention center, the Berks County. So I volunteered in there for 6 years. I'm a violin. So I would go in every Saturday and I would teach, or just like, you know, like guitar, we play violin, we play a little bit of piano. And just being in there every week with these families and you see kids learning to walk. I was in there at the point where people were staying for 2 years. You just, and the fact that a lot of people thought that was okay. And that shows, like, that to me is like the best example that you're willing to for a certain family. Because they were largely they were all different. So to me, that's where it was most real. You know, and on the Christian end of it, I was Catholic. I don't practice anymore. It's very Catholic. And when the report came out in August 2018, it really like detailed.
Hired somebody.
I just couldn't do it anymore. But before that, when Nino died in prison, she was in there for truancy charges. I went to the Lutheran Catholic Church. This called the St. Vincent de Paul Society. It's supposed to be the group that serves the poor. And so in church, they're always talking about poor widows. And here, poor widows died in our jail on truancy charges. ability to apply. I could not get the church to say, nothing, not the bishop, the nun signed the bishop, but nobody else, and I went to the same Vintage Hall Society, 2 12 people saying that something was behind happened. So that should be like, do they mean what they do? They mean what they say? You know, they say it all the time. But anyway, I'll pass. 3 minutes, is that your turn?
Either you got a scar on your belly, or you're not.
The signs
Two different things.
my own. Yes. Exactly.
Or something like this, well, we can't help them out, whoever that is involved, because it's going to take so much away from me, us. That's confusing. Like, I had been a Holy Spirit a couple of months ago. Right on what we just learned. So Edmund now, I'm the co-pastor of Renewed Spirit. That means that what used to be St. Luke's.
I've never been able to get it. Now, maybe you notice this.
It's starting to change. It's great too. God knows by many names.
Yes.
Okay, that's time. Switch.
Now I think it's your turn.
We're in the conversation. Bill's been talking the whole time. We had about 3 minutes.
I no longer. Yes.
White European Christian Church is not always about preservation of self. And when you talk about evangelism, 100 plus years, it was just make babies, make babies. Yes. Well, no, it's changing. It is changing. You start to see now more the concept of the church without walls, right? Church beyond walls. The majority of mentality is our place, our building, our sanctuary. Yesterday, you're changing that light bulb. My grandparents said that light bulb to the church. My kids are young generation. They see it and they see the hypocrisy behind it. They see that we've said one thing on Sunday morning.
It's the flip side, they don't love our neighbor color. So
We love ourselves more than our neighbors. Everybody said, you know what? They're very worldly. They don't have all the answers. But they see
sides, it's exactly, two sides of the same thing. Take us one over.
you know, that's what I'll say. Most of ones who sell the houses. Yes. And it shows up right. It shows up. We're in the position. 94% of school children are minorities. In this on Sunday. There might, but that's all you can say. That's all you can say. Sunday remains the most segregated day of.
All right, switch.
I can say a lot more. It's showing up right now. This is a failure of our church This is good. We should do this. It's too late. And it's not easy. Why the point was that these Christian change in attitude and respect the book out on the ingredients, but it should have been something that started over 20 years ago. Our culture has been outdated. Our youth has still working on this street. We'll sell the cars and make this a volunteer position. By the time we realize the direction that we're heading, in our defense,
You got it. So, my wife and I classic too. So I said, I'd like to have one of my bedside, and I'll say to it, they Google it, I'll go there, you're not talking about it. Yeah. One morning I did that. She tells a story about how Johnny
Pharisee, I'm not like that other guy over there.
and he was, she and her husband lived so and they decided they wanted to go to this place because Johnny Hart was showing him it was like his first experience. That was right. So they went there and they go to this club. I think it was in Germantown. And they went in. Everybody was black except for them. So why?
All right, let's switch, and we'll take stock after this 3-minute round, see where everybody is.
They listened to Johnny Hart. And when it was over, Johnny Hartman got up and It's not the only reason my kids go to church.
Oh, absolutely.
They were there was that's the message. Ignoring people. So what was
A very vocal man about this.
The thing that I also find interesting is every morning my mom and I argue politics for 45 minutes, whether we need to or not, you know, and according to she is conservative. But she, and I thought about my grandparents too, but they're not. They find it okay. Or if I heard something else that's happening in like that's kind of like that happened with my family. I'm like, why would we be that? So I said, is that kind of a step on? Like you could have a personal relationship with somebody who you're but then you separate it out.
I move out all the time and they move back in.
Why do you think
Having conversations, not thinking about things. You always have this online through the game
yeah, right, exactly.
I was studying, I forget what year I got it about ourselves. We can't see reality where they talk about how those describers like it's going to be around.
Yeah. Weird for everybody else. You're a good person. You're listening. You walk back here. For some, it's easy.
The real factor was people who experienced live with if you're in the mix, you discourse more.
That's how I don't ever do it. At all. My son would ask it's a chat box that's associated with online games. So you're playing a game, but you want to send somebody a message. You use your other hand and you send a quick message off on Discord. I barely text messages, but it's straight up it's a mission. It's a community that reaches across my son. One night said some things that were not helpful, and the police showed up.
All right. Raise your hand if your table has not gotten all the way around.
There was community.
Okay, so a couple more minutes.
Darn.
Back in.
All right, let's land the plane here.
Talk about vacation once again. Sure. Nobody knows what we're talking about. And almost every pastor I know has kids. His kids are living there.
Okay, all right, so we're going to move to our next part of this discussion this morning. Let me invite you to see, I am going to use the screen in this next section, so if you're having trouble seeing the screen, please feel free to move. There are some seats at this table in the front here, especially this, you guys, if you want to go here, you can see a little better.
Do you want the lights off or on? Robbie, you want the lights off or on?
Yeah, off for this one.
Okay.
Yeah. And just remind you that the bathrooms are in the back, down this way, so we're going to push through to 11:30, but if you need to kind of get up and take a bio break, just feel free to have, you've got permission to do so. So for this next session, what I'm going to do is share a little bit about some new public opinion data that our organization, PRRI, conducted in partnership with the Brookings Institution on this threat and challenge of white Christian nationalism in our culture and in our politics. And before I get to that, though, I should just say I hope this exercise was helpful to kind of just bring it into the room in very concrete ways. What are you seeing? What are you experiencing? How is this rearing its head? We'll have some time to talk about this. I'll do, we're going to have about 15 minutes of question and answer after this presentation, and then we will also kind of go back to the tables to talk about where we go from here. What do we do? What can we do? And to start thinking about solutions and ways of interventions, ways of addressing this at the local level last. But first, let me kind of get a sense of the lay of the land. So this is, see what you're looking at here. Well, get my thing to work. It was working just a minute ago. There we go. Okay. So this is the data you're going to see here is from a very large national survey that we conducted at the end of last year. Again, in partnership with the Brookings Institution. It's a little over 6,000 interviews with adults from all ranks of life. So it's a random probability sample of adults 18 years of age and older in the U.S. We are a 501c3, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. The survey was funded by the Foundation for Remote Open Society, the Carnegie Corporation of New York, the Wilbur and Hilda Glenn Family Foundation, and the Unitarian Universalist Beach Program at Shelter Rock. So a number of foundations came together to provide the funding to do this survey. So one of the challenges is trying to, especially when you're doing kind of quantitative statistical work, you have to be very specific about definitions and what counts as holding a Christian nationalist view. So we did a lot of work, drawing a lot of political science work that's already been done and social science work that's already been done to come up with what we ended up calling the Christian nationalism scale. And it was essentially 5 survey questions. And the way this works in social science is that if you're wanting to measure something complex and abstract like Christian nationalism or racism or those kinds of things, you don't want to just depend on one survey question, right? Because there could be something quirky or weird about how somebody's reacting to a single word even in a survey question. So you want to have at least 4 or 5 questions to measure something like this. And one test of their validity is how well this grouping of questions correlate together. And that is how likely is it that if you answer this way on one question, you'll also answer this way on another question. That gives you some confidence in the kind of stability of these measures. And so we measured a whole range of things, and we basically narrowed it down to 5 questions that correlate very, very highly together. For the data junkies in the room, there is a measure called Cronbach's alpha that you measure statistical correlation with. It scales 0 to 1, where 1 is a perfect correlation, where every respondent responds the same way on every question. That never happens. And 0, where every respondent responds a different way, and they're not correlated at all. These 5 questions correlate at 0.93, which is extremely high. Usually in statistical stuff, anything above 0.8 is good. And these are 0.93 in terms of how well they hang together. And so just there are these, basically, they're all an agree, disagree scale. So on a 4-point scale, completely agree, disagree, completely disagree. These are the questions. God has called Christians to exercise dominion over all areas of American society. The U.S. government should declare America a Christian nation. Being Christian is an important part of being truly American. If the U.S. moves away from our Christian foundations, we will not have a country anymore. U.S. laws should be based on Christian values, right? So these are the basic sentiments that we have kind of defined this worldview of Christian nationalism around. And you can see there's some variation in how many of it, this percent is the number of Americans who agree with each of those individual statements. So you can see there's some variation in how many people agree, but still they are very highly correlated. You know, if you agree with one, you're very likely to agree with the others. If you disagree with one, you're very likely to disagree with others. So we basically put all these things together, and through the magic of statistics, we were able to put them together. Is my clicker not working again? Into one single scale. There we go. And we basically grouped it this way. We came up with these categories on the left. These are our categories. They didn't come out of the. They were sort of. We came up with them as the analysts. So we came up with 4 groups: Christian nationalism adherents. These are basically people who overwhelmingly agreed with every question on that scale. Sympathizers, those were who agreed but were less intense. They didn't completely agree with everything. Skeptics, those who disagreed but didn't completely disagree. And then rejectors, these were people who completely disagreed with all 5 of those questions. So we kind of scored people in these 4 categories. And when we did that, this is what the American public looks like. So among those Christian nationalism adherents who basically completely agree with everything, it's about 10% of the country. Those who are sympathetic, so agree but not as intensely, are Christian nationalism sympathizers. So essentially, about 3 in 10, well, almost exactly 3 in 10 Americans are either Christian nationalism adherents or sympathizers. All right. So it means that, you know, on the glass half full side of it, by a margin of 2 to 1, most Americans reject this idea. But there is this group of about 3 in 10 Americans that are at least sympathetic, if not full adherents to that worldview. And here is the rest of the chart. It's about 4 in 10 who are skeptics, and about 29% is actually the exact number who fully reject this view as who are sympathetic or adherents to this worldview. So what does this mean? So I'm going to correlate these groups across some other questions so you can kind of see how they play. So here's a question where we asked people to pick where they were, gave them 2 different statements. Which one do you agree with most? On the one hand, I would prefer the nation to be the U.S. to be a nation made up of people belonging to a wide variety of religions, or I would prefer the U.S. to be a nation primarily made up of people who follow the Christian faith. These are all Americans here. As you can see, again, it's actually almost 3 to 1 here. Americans are on the side of religious pluralism. Most Americans are there. It's only about a quarter of Americans who say they'd rather the country be made of people who follow the Christian faith. However, if we look at those who are Christian nationalism adherents, they are the exact opposite, right, of all Americans here, right? So among those who are Christian nationalism adherents, 3/4 of them, 77%, said they prefer the U.S. to be made primarily out of people who follow the Christian faith. You can see that Christian nationalism sympathizers are a little bit more divided, but they're still a majority on the side of the country being a Christian nation. And here are the other 2, right? So you can see what a difference it makes being kind of either an adherent or a sympathizer versus a Christian nationalism skeptic or rejecter on just a basic question about religious pluralism in the country. We also asked people about the term Christian nationalism, right? What do you think of the term? Do you have a favorable view of this term? Do you have an unfavorable view of this term? There's actually been some books published recently of people embracing this term and saying why this is a good thing. Right? Marjorie Taylor Greene has come out, for example, and said, I am a proud Christian nationalist, right? And really owning this term. So what does this look like in the general public? It's fairly interesting that it does turn out that people who we independently score as being in that Christian nationalism adherent and sympathizer category do embrace the term. They have favorable views of the term. So it's not the case that this term is off-putting to people on that side of the scale. But what's interesting here is that if we look at people who, it's also the case that large swaths of the country have not heard of the term, right? So 37% of Americans aren't familiar with this term at all, despite, this was in December, despite a lot of media. If you're not a news junkie, you probably haven't heard of the term so much. And we'll have updated numbers on these across the year. We don't have any newer ones than this quite yet. And then you see the people who have unfavorable views of the term. But it's striking that those who we independently score as affirming those views also are leaning in to the term. And those who don't are kind of against those views also reject the term. And you can see the rejectors are the people who fully reject those sentiments are also the ones the most familiar with the term, right? So it's a little bit lopsided that way. Okay, so who are they? And we're going to break this out first by religion, then by party, so you can kind of see how this breaks out. So here are a lot of the larger religious groups that we tend to break out in the social sciences. You can see like, at the top of the list here, white evangelical Protestants. There is no other group that looks like white evangelical Protestants, right? So that's my people, Southern Baptists, right, and other kind of born-again, charismatic, Pentecostal type denominations here in this group, and it's 64%, right? So 2/3 of this group is either a Christian national adherent or a sympathizer. The second group, don't get too caught up in that. That group makes up less than 3% of the population. It's basically Asian American and Pacific Islander Protestants. It's a very small group, but it is a group that is sympathetic to this view. Hispanic Protestants also, they're less than 50%, but that is a group, they tend to be evangelical in their orientation as well. That group voted, for example, 60% for Donald Trump in the last election. And then it drops off pretty clearly from there. I'll draw your attention to the bottom, right? People who are in other Jews, other non-Christian religious Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus, very few takers on that part, the unaffiliated way down here. And here's the rest of the chart, kind of filling out with those skeptics and rejectors. That's the basic lay of the land. It really is just one group, one big group, white evangelical Protestants. They make up, it's interesting, this group has shrunk in the last 20 years quite dramatically. So if you go back to kind of turn of the 21st century in the early 2000s, white evangelicals made up about a quarter of the population. Today that number is 13.6. Right, so say that again, 13.6. They are basically the same size today as white mainline Protestants. So there's many of you who are mainline Protestant clergy have been beat up by your evangelical pastors, saying this is what happens, right, when you become liberal. We have seen in the last 20 years, no group in the sort of Christian world has dropped more precipitously in the last 20 years than white evangelical Protestants. Southern Baptists that I mentioned earlier, the largest Protestant denomination, have lost nearly 2 million members over the last 20 years, going from 16 million to just over 14 million just in the last 20 years. So that's kind of part of the dynamic here. Nonetheless, they are the group that is really the anchor for this worldview of white Christian nationalism. You can see white mainline Protestants and white Catholics much lower on the scale here than those. The other thing that we found is, I often get this objection, like, okay, well, those people who embrace white Christian nationalism they're maybe Christian in name only, they're not really connected to churches, like that kind of thing. What we actually found is that there's a very strong connection between church attendance and holding these views, right? So in other words, the more you attend church, the more likely you are to hold these views about white Christian nationalism. Again, that's kind of anchored because of the high attendance rates, especially of white evangelical Protestants. So nearly half of those who attend religious services once a week or more are either Christian nationalism adherents or sympathizers. The other thing we found is that this evangelical identity, interestingly enough, actually is very, very predictive of people who are white Christian nationalism adherents. And it cuts across race, right? So in other words, even among African Americans or Latinos, those who identify as born again or evangelical are much more likely to be sympathetic to Christian nationalism. So that evangelical born again identity holds a lot of power, especially among whites, but not only among whites on these measures. And finally, by party, it's not surprisingly heavily Republican, right? But a majority of self-identified Republicans today, it's 54%, are either Christian nationalism adherents or sympathizers, compared to only 15% of Democrats. And you can see independents are much closer to Democrats than they are to Republicans. We see this a lot on these kinds of measures, whether it's anti-immigrant sentiment, anti-Semitic views. There is a kind of asymmetric polarization. We hear the word polarization a lot, but on these kinds of measures, political scientists often use the term asymmetric polarization, which means, yes, there's party polarization, but it's not even. Right? Independents tend to be much closer to Democrats than to Republicans on these kinds of issues. So Republicans and white evangelicals tend to be outliers from the general public. It's not just a kind of even stair-step kind of, you could imagine a very even thing with independents being much further out here, but they're actually much closer to Democrats on this score than not. And here are the skeptics and rejectors on the other side of that by party. The other thing to say is that media plays a huge role here, and in particular, the television news outlets on the right play a huge role here, and it's measurable. I mean, this is remarkable. Actually, you can just measure it in the data. So what we do is we ask people which cable news outlets or television news sources do they most trust to give them. So this is not do they watch more, it's like who do they most trust to give them accurate information about current events and politics. That's what the question reads. So here's again what this looks like. The far right news category is primarily dominated by One American News and Newsmax, which are on the dial, kind of out there by Fox News on most cable outlets. But those by far, nearly 8 in 10 of those who most trust those networks say are actually qualify as either a Christian nationalist adherent or sympathizers. Fox News, 54% of those who say they most trust Fox News fall into these categories as well. Those who don't trust TV news or watch basically any other television, whether broadcast, CNN, MSNBC, any other, PBS, any other news source, far less likely to be a Christian nationalism adherent or sympathizer. So if we're thinking about vectors and how this sort of comes into the culture, this is clearly one way is churches and kind of right-wing media are ways that we see this kind of coming in. There's also some kind of interesting things here. Our CEO at PRRI just wrote a piece last week called "Not Just Proud Boys," and what she meant by that, she was working on this number. We find there are actually no gender differences that are significant in being Christian nationalism adherents. I think sometimes people think about this as being kind of a white male Christian thing, but in fact, we're finding the gender differences are much less pronounced here. In fact, you can see there's just really no significant differences in likelihood of kind of affirming these white Christian nationalist views. Age is significant. Basically, you can see that the older you are, the more likely you are to be sympathetic to Christian nationalism. It goes kind of down, stair-stepping down by age. Similar thing with education. Education is significant. The big break is those with a 4-year college degree or not. Right? So those with less than a 4-year college degree, much more likely to be sympathetic to Christian nationalism than those with a 4-year college degree. This next was also a little bit surprising. Not huge racial differences. Now I'm going to have a big asterisk to put here, but what we find is that overall, it is things like evangelical identity. What it basically tells you is that it's not just race playing a role here, but it's evangelical identity, media, partisanship, education, right, that are the real drivers of this. And race by itself, I'll show you how this does play a role in a moment, but race by itself as an independent thing is not as powerful as you might think as a driver here. So the other thing we did in this survey is we tried to look not just at Christian nationalism, but how does it fit in a broader worldview? And in particular, we wanted to look at some of the other ideologies that are functioning on the conservative side of politics, and how does it intersect with these things. And so we have measures here of how does it intersect with anti-black racism, how does it intersect with anti-Muslim views, how does it intersect with anti-Semitic views, How does it intersect with anti-immigrant views, and how does it intersect with patriarchal gender roles? So I'm kind of, basically the answer is it's positively correlated with all of those things, right? And so I'm going to kind of show you how that is, and here we will see it is positively correlated, and on several of these measures you can see white identity playing a particular role. So I'm going to break out Christian nationalism who are white and those who are not white, and you can see particularly on views around immigration, anti-Muslim views, and anti-black views, that white identity is kind of a turbocharging factor here on these views. So I'm going to start off with measures of anti-black racism. We have a number of questions. This is just a sampling here, but the ones with the hash marks are all Americans, and I've got 4 statements here, and what I'm measuring is either of the disagree side of that question or the agree side, because I want to get them all going the same direction, same ideological direction. And then the first measure is all Americans. The second one is Christian nationalism adherents. So just to take the first one, this is people who disagree with the statement that generations of slavery and discrimination have created conditions that make it difficult for many black Americans to work their way out of the lower class. In other words, the past history of discrimination and slavery make no difference in current inequalities, a kind of denial of systemic racism in the country. 45% of the country disagrees with that statement, but among Christian nationalism adherents, it jumps to 70% who disagree with that statement. Another one is kind of about resentment, like so-called reverse discrimination. Today, discrimination against white Americans has become as big a problem as discrimination against black Americans and other minorities. 41% of the country agrees with that statement, but 77% of those who are Christian nationalism adherents agree with that statement, and on, so that the other patterns are basically the same. But let me show you what happens if I break out white Christian nationalism adherents and white and Christian nationalism adherents of color. We can actually see some differences here. So essentially on all of these questions, if you are a Christian nationalism adherent and you are white, you bump up about 10 more points, right? So white identity kind of pushes you about 10 more points further down that road. And if you look, I'm going to put here, these are Christian, that last one is Christian nationalism adherents of color, right, who are Latino, AAPI, African American, etc. Because there are some in that category, but their views on kind of denials of systemic racism generally are like 30, 40 percentage points different right here. So white identity, even inside that Christian nationalism world, functions in a pretty powerful way to kind of turbocharge these views. Again, we're like 8 and 10 disagreeing that past discrimination has anything to do with current inequalities. More than 8 and 10 agreeing that whites are discriminated against, and that's a big problem as discrimination against other minority groups in the country. We kind of shift to anti-immigrant views. Very similar thing here. I'll just use the bottom one as an example. This one is one you've heard of, the great replacement theory that sometimes is kind of making the rounds in conservative circles. That this idea immigrants are invading our country and replacing our cultural and ethnic background. So only 32% of Americans agree with that statement, but 71% of those who are Christian nationalism adherents agree with that statement. And again, if you are a Christian nationalism adherent and you are white, the views bump up about 10 percentage points, right? So 81% of white Christian nationalism adherents agree with this so-called kind of replacement theory rhetoric. Adherents of color look, for the most part, pretty different on there. Even though they're Christian nationalism adherents, it doesn't kind of do the same kind of work on this front. So let me kind of move on to anti-Muslim views. This very similar kind of patterns here, where 3 in 10 Americans in this last one agree with Trump's travel ban that he tried to institute against some Muslim majority countries. But 2/3 of Christian nationalism adherents agree with that statement, and again, slightly more if you were white, agreeing with that statement, less if you were not white and a Christian nationalism adherent. Now, moving to anti-Semitic views, it gets a little more complicated in this space. So I'll kind of just do the Christian nationalism adherents. You can certainly see across a whole range of questions. We work with ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, and to work with some of the questions they've actually asked are in this survey. But on several of these measures, like Jewish people are more loyal to Israel than America, right? Only 24% of Americans agree with that, but 44% of Christian nationalism adherents. The idea that Jewish people stick together more than other Americans, 41% of Americans, but 61% of Christian nationalism adherents agree with that. But here, it's interesting, we don't see the big differences. I'm going to put them both up. We don't see huge differences by race, but when we do, we actually see adherents of color actually a little bit higher on some of these measures. So I mean, it's a kind of different dynamic here by race on this particular question. And we can kind of come back and talk about that a little bit, but I think this is worth paying attention to here, that the way that race works within Christian nationalist adherents, particularly on anti-Semitism views in the country. And then finally, patriarchal gender roles. This also kind of comes along for the ride in the worldview here. Just to take one question here. This first one is a question that it's a question from the General Social Survey, which is a survey that's been ongoing for decades that social scientists use. It's an odd-sounding question to the ear, I think. Society as a whole has become too soft and feminine. But it's a long trend history. And it was remarkably in 2016 one of the most predictive questions for vote for Trump in 2016 was this question. Right? You can see here 38% of Americans agree with that, but among Christian nationalism adherents, 2/3, right, agree with that one. The other one, down here, this is a new question that we wrote for the survey. In a truly Christian family, the husband is head of the household and his wife submits to his leadership. Right? A third of the country agrees with that statement. 69%, right, of those who are Christian nationalism adherents agree with that conception of the family here. And you can see also it's a little complicated. And again, this is within Christian nationalism adherents, but race is kind of scrambled here, right? A little bit on that question, for example, Christian nationalism adherents of color actually score higher than white Christian nationalism adherents do on the traditional gender roles question. But nonetheless, this is clearly 30 percentage points more if you're a Christian nationalism adherent comes along for the ride. So that worldview then, right, is positively correlated with anti-black racism and the denial of systemic racism, anti-Muslim attitudes, anti-black attitudes, anti-Semitic attitudes, and these hierarchical gender role questions. Yeah, you have a question?
I'm a little confused.
Yeah.
Is the black line people of color?
So no, the blue, it's blue actually, but the navy blue line is white Christian nationalism adherents. Right, so let's go, so the first one, kind of broad hash marks, that's all Americans. The second one with the kind of finer hash marks, those are all Christian nationalism adherents. The next line are Christian nationalism adherents who are white. And then the final line is Christian nationalism adherents who are not white. Right? Yeah, sorry about that. Yes, it's a little bit complicated. But I wanted to show this just because you could see, in particular around anti-black sentiment, anti-immigrant sentiment, anti-Muslim sentiment, that whiteness kind of turbocharges those views, even inside of Christian nationalism. On anti-Semitism and traditional gender roles, it's a little less that way. In fact, on some of these questions, being not white plays a stronger role on some of these questions. But Christian nationalism, nonetheless, is the big driver here and kind of making them look different than other Americans across all of these measures. So say a little bit more about whiteness here. I mentioned this in my opening remarks, this idea, and we actually had a survey question. We had to ask people straight out, do you agree that God intended America to be a new promised land where European Christians could create a society that would be an example to the rest of the world? Right? That is straight out of Manifest Destiny, straight out of kind of early kind of founding documents, sort of City on a Hill and all that stuff.
Which the Pope just rejected.
What's that?
The Pope just rejected the doctrine of discovery. It's in the newspaper today, I think.
Thank you for that. I'm going to take a quick detour based on that. Let me give you the numbers, and I'm going to take a quick detour on that because I think it's really notable. So here's what it looks like by Christian. So Christian nationalism adherents, 83% agree. Right? Sorry, adherents are either completely or mostly agree with that statement. Sympathizers still pretty much 2/3 agreeing with that statement. Drops off a lot among Christian nationalism skeptics and rejectors. As a whole, it's only about 3 in 10 Americans who agree with that statement, so it lines up pretty well with the adherents. But you can really see that just overtly, like agreeing, right, with this conception. You gave me I'll take a quick little detour. So yes, so in the paper yesterday, I saw that there was a repudiation by Pope Francis of this thing called the Doctrine of Discovery, right? Which I did not know anything about until about 3 years ago. After all my education and all that, I never really encountered it. It is an anchor point of my new book, actually. So I've got a new book coming out September 5th called The Hidden Roots of White Supremacy and the Path to a Shared American Future. One of the anchor points is this Doctrine of Discovery. A number of denominations have rejected it already. The Episcopal Church has rejected it. The ELCA has rejected it. There's kind of movement at World Council of Churches to reject it. But it has never been rejected by the organization that really put it forward, that is the Catholic Church, until just yesterday. I haven't actually had a chance to read the full statement. What I think has happened, though, is that there was a repudiation of it without culpability, without an admission of culpability, right? So I'm going to kind of go back and read it, but I followed his. So Pope Francis went on a kind of, he called it a penitential tour, actually, of Canada, and visited a bunch of boarding schools and other places where all these atrocities had occurred in the name of the church, and he called it a penitential pilgrimage, and he actually did issue an apology there. But again, if you parse the apology, I don't think any of us would be very satisfied if we got this apology from a spouse, for example, for some wrongdoing, right? Because if you parse the words carefully, what in those statements, it basically says, yes, the teachings of the church were misused by colonial powers, right? That kind of a thing, right? But it doesn't lay the blame at the doorstep of the church itself, even though these documents were issued by the Pope's predecessors, right, in the 15th century, that would actually, I mean, in these documents, it basically says that you have the blessing of the church if you encounter any undiscovered lands, and the definition of an undiscovered land was land that might be occupied by non-Christian people and not already under the domination of another Christian prince. Right? That was the definition of undiscovered land, and it explicitly gave them permission to dominate the people in that land, and the words in the documents actually say, and to permit them to subject them to permanent slavery. That's in the document, right? So I'm very happy that because he got asked about the Doctrine of Discovery in that tour last year, and he basically acted like he didn't know what it was when he got asked about it by two Native American reporters. So he's kind of come around, and I think there has been this apology, but I think we should look and see, in my mind, an apology only sticks if there's an admission of culpability, right, and an ownership of wrongdoing. For most of us in the Christian tradition, repentance is kind of dependent upon, right, that idea of kind of accepting responsibility, and then we can, talk about kind of where we go from there. So this is kind of where we are in terms of kind of affirming that. One other thing we did, it's often challenging to get people in a public opinion survey, even when it's anonymous. Ours are anonymous and online, so there's not even a human interviewer interacting with someone. And we assure people of all kinds of anonymity. When we get the data back, we don't get any even our organization doesn't get any identifying markers here. But nonetheless, we wanted to do a little survey experiment, and what we did was we wanted to see if we were really interested in this last question. The United States is a white Christian nation, and I am willing to fight to keep it that way, right? How many people would kind of actually believe that, right? Not only that they, this idea of the country being a white Christian nation, but are prepared to fight to keep it that way, because we're really concerned about the political violence side of this. Now, it's tough to kind of ask people that straight out, right? Because people might get a little nervous, either in an anonymous survey about admitting that, or even admitting it to themselves in some way. So what we did was we divided the sample in half, and it's a kind of technique that's sometimes used in survey, it's called survey experiments, and we essentially, it's like a controlled experiment. So what we do is we divide the survey into two demographically identical halves. So we had like 2,500 people on this, or 3,000 people on this side, 3,000 people on this side, demographically matched, and then we said, okay, we're going to read you a series of statements. Don't tell us which of the statements you agree with, just tell us how many of the statements you agree with. And one half of the sample only got 3 questions. The other half of the sample got 4, right? So the only way that the average number of questions are different is if people are picking that fourth question and say, yes, I agree with the fourth question. So you can kind of, you don't know which people said it, but you know by just comparing the averages between the two questions how many said it. So we basically said it this way. We had 3 kind of innocuous control questions, and then this fourth question that we were really interested in here. And when we compared the two averages, this is what we found. Right here on the left is essentially we had 17% of Americans who were willing to affirm that question, right? So not only is the country a white Christian country, but I am willing to fight to keep it that way. So it's nearly 1 in 5 Americans kind of willing to say that outright on a survey. And just to kind of get, these are the same numbers we were looking at before, but just to kind of stack these two things up here, that if you look at the number of people who are Christian adherents and sympathizers on the one hand, and these are the people who are saying, not only do I agree with that, but I'm willing to fight to keep it that way. That's kind of where we are in the country today on these sentiments. And one more measure here on violence that we asked some questions about individual violence, about whether people have done any of these other things, push, grabbed, or shoved someone, hit, kicked, bit, or slapped someone, or threatened to use or actually use a weapon on someone. As you can imagine, not that many Americans have done these things, especially the last one, so these numbers are fairly small, but we still do see a difference between those who are Christian nationalism adherents are more likely, even in their personal lives, to say they have kind of resorted to violence. It's 7% say Christian nationalism adherents say they threatened to use or actually used a gun, knife, or weapon on someone. Again, it looks pretty different than the than the rejectors. On the other hand, that's kind of in their individual life. We had another question about political violence, the support for political violence. We worded the question this way: because things have gotten so far off track, true American patriots may have to resort to violence in order to save our country. And what we find here is that among all Americans, it's very few takers, right? Only 16% of Americans agree with that statement. But among Christian nationalism adherents, it's 40% who say that that true American patriots may have to resort to violence in order to save the country. Sympathizers, it's a little less than a quarter, and you see it drops off pretty quickly here among the skeptics and rejectors here. But by my mind, that 40% number is a big one, right? I'm saying that we may have to resort, that's going to be justified, and we might even call that a patriotic act, right? Of doing that. So let me kind of think there's that's kind of the last of the data. So I'm going to kind of pause there and just see where we want to go. I'm going to take about 15 minutes of questions, and we're going to move back to some discussion at the table. So questions, yeah.
Who do you fight against to make America great? Who are you fighting?
Yeah.
If you're going to use violence, I mean, you just go down the street and see a Biden sign and shoot up someone. I mean, how do you do that?
Yeah. Well, I think unfortunately what we're seeing, is we've seen an uptick in anti-Semitic activity across the country. ADL just released a report, marking an uptick there. And so I do think some of it actually is random acts of violence, people being kind of energized so that, I live in D.C., right outside of D.C., but, on January 6th, we not only had these stuff going on in the Capitol, but the week before that, while people were filing into D.C., we did have roving bands of these Proud Boys who beat up random African-American people on the street. Like, they were literally just, looking for trouble. They burned a Black Lives Matter flag outside of a church downtown D.C. A couple of people just wrong place, wrong time, got beat up. So I think there is that kind of randomness. But I think the idea, right, is, and I was also struck by, so I live in Jamie Raskin's district, right, who was kind of head of the impeachment. He's a neighbor, lives right across the street. And I was struck in his book where he talked about his experience of the insurrection and impeachment trial, that when he talked to the police officers, who the Capitol Police officers that day, that one of them in particular was African American, and he said, I have never in my adult life been called the N-word, right? But took so much abuse that day, and it was racist, right, abuse that day from that crowd there, and I don't think that's coincidental, right? If you looked at the crowd, it wasn't all white, it was overwhelmingly white. it was Christian, right? Those of us who are Protestant, the most heartbreaking part of that to me was seeing the Christian flag, that white flag with the blue canton and the red Latin cross up in the corner that sits behind the pulpit on the stage for many, white Christian churches, Protestant churches. Certainly in my congregation growing up, we had the American flag on one side and we had the Christian flag on the other side behind the pulpit. Seeing that flag marched into a breached Capitol along with the Confederate flag. And they were not fighting each other, right? They were on the same side that day, right? Seeing those Christian symbols marshaled with anti-Semitic people wearing Camp Auschwitz t-shirts and sweaty and hoodies, right? All of that, and again, on the same side, right? These people weren't fighting each other, arguing with each other. They were marching together under common purpose. So I think, who are we fighting? I mean, I think the targets essentially become, and I'll just put it this way, again, this is not new, right? If we remember, I think we forget sometimes, the KKK, right? The kind of the revival of the KKK in the early part of the 20th century was positively a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant Christian group. Right? That's who that group was. Right? That's why they were anti-Catholic and anti-Jewish. Right? Because their vision of the country was a Protestant Christian country. It was a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant Christian country. That's what they were defending. And I think that's really, anyone who doesn't fit that definition, that's who we're fighting, right? If we're kind of standing for this vision of the country. It is absolutely an ethno-religious movement. So when I talk about this, I do talk about it as white Christian nationalism, because that is really the thing that turbocharges it and gives it its real energy. Yeah.
I had two questions. Any comments on where rural and region fits into this? Second question, if you're polling on the connection to anti-Muslim, anti-Jewish, anti-black, and anti-gender, I'm surprised there was no polling on anti-LGBTQ, and is that in and of itself an act of homophobia?
Right, well, I'll take the last question first. So one of our, I didn't have it here, but one of our, we have 5 areas of work at PRRI that we do. One of them is LGBTQ rights, right? So that's a 20% of our work is in that space. We just released a report last week. You can go on our website. It's on the homepage right now. That's an entire survey of over 22,000 Americans on LGBTQ rights that we conducted in 2022. And at the end of that report, we actually do it the other way, right? So we have, what do people think about LGBTQ rights? We also, by the way, it's one of the only surveys that has data on all 50 states. We actually have Pennsylvania-specific data in that survey. If you want to go take a look at it, which you don't hardly get state level data, but because we did so many interviews, we have Pennsylvania. You can actually go look at, break it out. There's an interactive map, by the way. So it's on the homepage at prrri.org. We have an interactive map at this address, ava.pri.org, and where you can actually go state by state and take a look. And at the end of that report, we actually look at it the other way. What's the relationship between LGBTQ rights and Christian nationalism? And it is positively correlated on that report. So I think that's the answer to the second question. The first one was about rural, urban,
and region.
And region, yeah. So here's the interesting thing. We did a big survey last year with an organization called E Pluribus Unum, which is Mitch Landrieu, former mayor of New Orleans, his organization. He was the early mayor to take down Confederate monuments in New Orleans. Right? He was on his watch that happened. And we were doing a survey of attitudes about Confederate monuments, this national survey. We were stunned to see how little region matters today. Or you think of that as a southern thing, right? But on these issues, whether we're talking about immigration or anti-Muslim attitudes or racial issues, region has become supplanted by party, essentially. So the things have been nationalized. And so the thing that always matters more is party than region. The urban-rural divide is still important, though. That one does matter. It's explainable in part by different education levels and age. levels between, because in urban centers, you tend to have more people with four-year college degrees and younger people, and in the exurbs and rural areas, it tends to be older and less people with four-year college degrees. So, and that divide does absolutely still happen.
I mentioned specifically the Appalachian region.
Yeah.
Because in most of the polling with Obama and Trump, what was aberrational was Appalachian people going against Obama, but going for Trump.
Yeah, you can see in the geography, there's a kind of U-shaped line that comes down through the Midwest and then up the Appalachian Mountains. And you can see that kind of pattern on a lot of questions like that. You can see, like, so we have the heat map, it's aba.pri.org. We have a heat map, and so whether you're doing a heat map of LGBTQ rights, a heat map of abortion, a heat map of immigration attitudes, you could see that same, those states will be light, depending on which end of the question you're looking at, either more darkly colored, more lightly colored. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
With the population of white evangelical Protestants dropping, and the fact that most people who identify, or a majority, as national or Christian nationalists being 60, 65 or older, can we see a drop in that trend then? Can we look forward to that?
Yeah, so the question is whether, because we're seeing a drop in the white evangelical population and white Christian population in general, does that mean these numbers will decline? So I think the answer is at some point, yes. Here's my concern, though. It will probably be another decade, right, before we really see enough of that drop to happen, because there's two things going on here. One is that these groups tend to be registered and turn out to vote at higher levels than other Americans, right? So in the last election, while white evangelicals were 14% of the population, they were 21% of voters, right? Because they turn out to vote at higher rates than other Americans do. So that they're overrepresented at the polls, both at the state and national level. So that's one factor. So we see this kind of lag effect at what voting America looks like and what the rest, real America looks like are different things. So there's about a 10-year lag usually in kind of catching up to those things. The other thing to say is that even though white evangelicals are now down under 14% of the population, they still make up about 30% of the Republican Party, right, of self-identified Republicans. It's because they're so heavily loaded on one side of the partisan divide. They voted 86% for Trump in 2020, 81% in 2016, 86% in 2020. Actually went up during that time. And because they're so lopsided on one side, they still have a very outside voice in that one political party. So they're still influential because they're just almost all over there.
Parental use of children and children's rights. It's something that concerns me in regards to this drop-off that we're hoping to see is this current fight around parents' rights coming from Christian nationalism. And it's something that has a history dating back in the 60s and 70s. Has that been something you have studied around the views that they hold, or is that something you're concerned with?
Yes, the question's about the kind of more recent turn around parents' rights, particularly in schools. So again, I'm from DC, so we saw Glenn Youngkin kind of piloting this in Virginia in the last election cycle. So yes, we're doing, we actually have some new polling coming on that very soon. And you're right, it is also important to say this is a revival of stuff we saw in the 80s, right, about kind of with the Christian Coalition talking about taking over school boards and stuff like that. And the bigger thing to say about it is a kind of fight with and a fight about control of public schools, right? That's the other kind of thing to say about it. So whether you're talking about critical race theory stuff or taking anything off the shelves that has to do with human sexuality in any kind of way, but particularly for kind of things that have to do with lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender topics in the schools. I mean, I think this is a revival of something we saw in the 80s, and we're polling on this already. We have some polling that shows that there's not actually as much traction on that issue as it looks like just in the political space among everyday Americans. So among the kind of activist world and the kind of, it's not that hard to get 20 people to show up to a school board meeting, especially with social media today. And so I think that we're seeing more flare up or more smoke than there is fire, I think, on that. Most Americans, we've asked, trust teachers and librarians to do their jobs, don't really think that we should be reaching in and kind of controlling what they do and don't teach. Most of them want, on the issue of race, the full history of our country to be taught, and including slavery, including racism. Don't want that to be, literally whitewashed. So I don't think there's as much support for that as it seems like there might be. And my take is there's a real possibility of overreaching there. It might actually end up falling flat. So, I would take one more, and we're going to go to the next
It's
set.
a curiosity question, but you said most of your surveys or all of your surveys are online. So how do you keep from skewing that by just people who would answer the survey?
No, it's a great question. Yeah, so we're very careful about this. We made the switch from telephone to online about 5 years ago. And the main reason we did it is because the response rates for telephone surveys were just dying, right? And the thing that ultimately killed them was caller ID, right? So I mean, how many of you answer, right? It was like unknown, or especially when Apple started adding the text possible spam, right? To like, oh no, I'm not answering that, right? So that effectively killed telephone surveying. So the best methods today really are online, but the organization that we partner with and the field house that we use, the reason why we use them is that they actually actively recruit people through the mail, right? So you don't have to be online to be recruited. So you're randomly recruited through the mail, and if you agree to participate, they will provide internet service, they will provide a computer, so they actually provide service so that because what you end up with is it can skew, you may not get older people, you may not get lower income people, right, who don't have broadband or don't have devices, but they actually take care of that, so the people that we're, who get recruited actually get provided those services in order for the sample to be more balanced. But it's a tricky thing, but that's the best, it really is kind of the top methodology that we can do. But and on a big survey like this, I mean, we're spending upwards of $200,000, right, to do one of these right. So it's not a cheap thing to do it well these days. All right. Okay. So again, we're going to move into kind of our second thing, so we don't end up too far back on lunch. But what I want us to do is to kind of go back to the tables, and we're going to take about 30 minutes, I think, because we're running a little behind. We'll take about 30 minutes. But what I want to do is kind of have you around the table sort of come up with, and we'll take just 2 minutes each this time, but think about what might be helpful to address this, right? Maybe what have you tried? What has worked in your family, your congregation, your community? What might you try that might work? It's kind of either share some successes, do some brainstorming. No idea is a bad idea. Some of you may have seen a thing that Steve sent around. I wrote a thing a year ago called 7 Things Churches Can Do to kind of come to terms with white supremacy at church. But think about what has worked, what work might need to be done, how might you do it. But just spend some time brainstorming on that around the table. And we're going to take about 30 minutes to do that. We'll do a quick report back out this time, and we'll wrap it up with that. So go.
Oh, okay.
You can take 30 seconds to stand up and stretch if you'd like.
Notion of nationalism. If we know the strong connection to the GOP, it's also fair
What are you now?
Either cut or you have to take a hold. You don't have to take a hold. Once you are, you can push it out. Yeah, it is.
Let's all stop voting.
Well, here, grab it with that. Grab it.
We have to be visible. Yeah, one of the things that we've noticed is that with our campus, as I mentioned earlier, my wife and I have been doing this for more than 10 years now. We decided that we did a political action committee so that we could get donations, we could donate, we could use it appropriately without going through red tape.
The other one is education. Only 35% of Berks County is college educated. And there's a strong connection between the uneducated, lacking information, and all the things that Christian teaching long-term education, short-term, everybody stop voting Republican.
I think you're absolutely correct. Because the assumption is, just as you said, all of us missing people assume it. I know. I'm a Democrat, it's a cell. There's no one set of values. So for example, exactly.
That's a good thing about America. Twice the majority
Right here. Oh, like this? Okay. Uh-oh. We bumped this. We bumped this. Well, I'll tell him. He won't like it. Not right now, right? Yeah, so she was saying shift all the snacks to there. And then her salads and stuff could be there.
college education and visibility. Hey, Mary.
School board, we can actually put all the, we can put all the various.
So there was some of those questions, but by
There you go.
right.
Maybe in suburban areas.
We like to say, Democrats, I run the ministerial.
They let me fall in love.
They don't fall in love, they just fall in love.
I'm gonna see if
Christians like probably everyone. Well, that's
Some more regular coffee.
No, we need to brew more.
the assumption is that
The pot that's there is decaf.
but
I won't even ask where it comes from, I'll just drink it.
down my side, that somehow the sentiment requires when it's not. One of the reasons, one of the ways to combat that is put your yard signs.
That could be drive-bys by people in Elton.
Put your signs up, put your flag out. Things that's happened is they have whatever it is. What I do is I put it out. When it comes dark, I'm a Boy Scout. But they don't. Faded. But yeah, that, like you said, we can do that in many ways. Write a letter to the editor. Don't have calories like this. Not intended to write to Kristen.
Because we're gonna need a new one.
Should have another trash can.
I guess I use that. But that's true, people going to best schools in Boston area. It's not that they stay in Boston. And have some. My son's out there, and now my youngest.
So she said, put it on and slice it.
Yes, Yeah, I know.
We moved this. That might not be
He went out there and lost. But anyway. He's struggling People all leave. I'm walking down the street. People didn't say Agreed. You know, you said
You're just like the restaurants. They always put the desserts near the door where you come in. There you go.
particularly around a topic or like
I found some in the bottom of the barrel.
They said that,
I was surprised with them saying that yes, I am Christian dance. There's no separation between genders. And what surprised me when I delved into to figure out how there was a difference in gender. Women why would it be more reachable to democratic everything? Right. Now he's, and it sounds like the women are just as stupid. So we have to talk about
my response to it is they present
perhaps.
What I wanted to say that,
But that's surprising.
yeah. I was in high school, until I was in 12. Then I had an English teacher. The English teacher decided to get us to read and write an essay every time. Disgusting. That was smart.
What kind of books did I
All that I remember, some of the greatest
I had a high school teacher that was big on, and he impressed me. He had a post-World War II Jewish American writers. All that really, I mean, my eyes were open. That was a deep dive in, and I'm grateful for it.
Yeah.
Very nice to see you.
Well, I'll try, but I'll hate you. So. Oh, yeah.
Which mayor? Which mayor? Before you.
I thought all of they
What did you do?
Not in the church. We did the building.
Maybe you were that teacher. So on health social worker like training and so then you know all the issues.
This is very
Let's take about 5 more minutes, wrap up, and if you can be prepared to just have somebody share a couple of ideas from each table, we'll go around. So 5 more minutes.
Do we still have hot water here somewhere?
Not the only future. I meant your mind to somebody. Or do you instead focus on those who already my co-pastor, only the best way to deal with some of the issues of that are buried in our really focusing on foreseeing by bringing other people in, bringing in the diversity, reaching out. Might not be happy about it, but they will slowly have a number or Arthur and because it's very easy because really you're only sitting with people in the same race. So you're forced to get to know how many Democrats. Then your eyes get off.
Doesn't that guarantee that two Democrats are going to win? Yeah, no, I bet you that could happen. That could happen. They've been cutting their own throats.
Been up since, I'm sure.
And that showed up in the last one. I would think that's expedite.
I should be
Not even like sheriff. Not even like sheriff or constable. Don't go for that. No. Magistrate judges. I have I have voted for. I don't think I've voted for Democratic. In New York, you have other options. Sometimes liberals, sometimes the same message. To the Democratic establishment, I have voted another column. I think that would be Berks is heavily Republican. So I think that maybe
All right, let's start wrapping it up. 1 more minute.
Please don't tell anyone. But then often you can have someone running. There's a lot of vacancies. I think
Somebody asked that. Very well done.
And I allow for the possibility
How you doing, Megan?
when I said, by the way, I said,
Okay. Reconvene here.
and the young evangelicals are not like their parents.
Be careful of this. We had to move it. No, it's all right. We had to move it on the.
All right, what we're going to do is we're going to just get each panel to give us like one or two very quick things
get the top of my head.
for this conversation.
It won't, I don't think. I just want to.
How might we address this issue in our general local context?
Can I ask where you get your tax?
All right,
I can't remember.
we're going to start with this table over
I
here.
used to have a gray
You
one.
would just, whoever can be, stand up and give us, again, quickly, one or two things so we can get around and still get some fun.
Oh, that's right, you live right here. Yeah.
I'm loud, but not that loud. We talked about the need for conflict and difficult discussions to be had and to create safe spaces to do so and teach children how to do so. And we also talked a little bit about we need child care and true social support so that kids are learning these things as children alongside with us and not being seen as something that should be hidden from society, as well as in general, just ensuring that we create truly safe spaces to hold these difficult and hard conversations with other white folks, so that they can share things that we don't agree with, and we don't vilify them, but help them walk through that and find a different answer.
Right. Two here.
Our group talked about one church experience where they do every year in Lent an interfaith exchange and how valuable that's been for their faith community. And so that led us into a further discussion about how critical it is to get people just talking to each other, to break down some of those walls, to blend a little bit better, to understand one another, for empathy, for compassion, for just greater understanding. It comes down to dialogue and sort of how do we actually get people in front of one another. So that's our challenge.
Right.
I could.
We talked about,
You'll spend 20 minutes.
No, I couldn't.
we've talked about the importance of small group discussions in an open environment. And we thought that perhaps taking the subject as an entry point, the way a lot of churches have the American flag in the church sanctuary, as a way of getting into the topic of white Christian nationalism. And I thought it would be good to develop some sort of guide for deconstruction. There's a lot of talk about Christian deconstruction among the evangelical world these days. Why not help people deconstruct from being white Christian nationalists and white supremacists?
Table here.
Well, we'll follow up on that because we decided, or I decided, there's two of us, that the Chinese have the right approach. You take the wrong-thinking people and put them in a camp to change their wrong thinking.
All right, well, I did say no idea was a bad idea, but I'm not so sure. right, we'll go, Senator here.
Well, we had a great discussion. I'm not sure we came up with much, but one thing we did talk about was why people believe or think or feel, act like they do, you know, and a lot of it, of course, comes from our, and you talked about this, comes from the early experiences in life and then the rest of our experiences of, you know, so I think we have to understand that, you know, and we point the fingers at those white evangelical folks that have these hard views. You know, they're coming out of certain experience, and to if we can talk to them, we have to understand those experiences too. As well as within our own congregations, I don't have a lot of really fundamental folks with hardcore beliefs, and certainly not Christian nationalist beliefs, but I have a lot of people in my congregation that believe, and probably many of us, and some of us maybe here too, that Christianity is the way. Now, I think many of us would say that there's other ways too to God, but you know, those folks say Christianity is the way, it's the only way, the Bible tells me that, and that's the way I'm going to live and act. And I think we need to talk to those people as well, and probably easier than the people really on the far right, that it's going to be hard to talk to.
Back table? Yep.
We had a couple of ideas. One, more events like this, I think comes out of what we said. We think this is going very well. Visibility of those who are not sympathetic to Christian nationalism, and actions in that visibility as well. Education, elimination of the Electoral College, campaign finance reform, and my particular favorite, given the strong connection to the Republican Party, that at every level of office, even by the non-crazy candidates, stop voting Republican.
Table over here. Adjacent back table, yes.
I'll go for you.
All of you stare at each other. The first one that blinks, stand up. All right, anything? If not, we can move on. Move on. Okay.
I want to tell you a story, not quite on point, but Jim doesn't like to speak in public, so he won't tell it, so I will. My husband had a colleague in Schenectady for many years who had immigrated from Taiwan, where the culture of the country was Confucianist Buddhist. And she arrived with this sort of notion that countries have identifying religions. That's your identity. And so there she was, a non-Christian, semi-practicing Buddhist, bringing up her children in Schenectady, New York. She's a chemist. And she said to Jim one day, "I need to bring my children to church." And he said, "Why? You're not Christian." And she said, "Because this is a Christian nation. It's what you do." So if that was the impression she got, this was 20, 30 years ago, but still, if that was what she absorbed when she came over, that America is a Christian nation, and why shouldn't she? Every holiday is arranged around the Christian calendar. Then this isn't a new problem.
Thank you. All right. Middle table here.
One of our group members actually has gone to the Berks County Patriots meetings, and I give her a lot of credit for doing that. But she sits there and she has conversations with the people. It's not always receptive, but it's taking that step and trying to do that. At my church, we also have Friday night, once a month, worship and mealtime, and the message that I preach is always more controversial than I probably could get in trouble with if I preached on Sunday morning. So I've talked about gun violence, I've talked about climate change, those kinds of things. But as I say that, and as I was sitting here, I was thinking, yes, but that's part of the problem. Because if we can't preach it on a Sunday morning,
then that's part of the problem itself.
Great, right there. Oh, you have an answer?
You know, I go to the Patriot meetings, and let me tell you, I a lot of fear when I even thought of going. One of the reasons I decided I was going to go, this is before the pandemic stuff happened, and I still continue to go when I'm available. But I just thought, when we have opposite opinions, we need to come together and talk. How can I do that? How can I do that? Except putting myself in spaces where there are people that really disagree. So, I'm fearful. Oh my God. But now, we are all Christian. We don't wear a sign. We're supposed to carry it within ourselves and depend on Christ to give us the fortitude to do things that we're afraid to do. And be with me, and I have to trust in that. So once I got that through my head, I said to myself, I have to have a plan of how I'm going to do this because I'm fearful. And so I decided that I would go in, I'm not going to ever raise my hand in the whole group and say anything out loud to the whole group. But I will do it one-on-one, okay? And how do we do this as human beings? What we normally do, I had to think through what we do normally as human beings. We introduce ourselves to each other. I will go up to somebody as you're walking around the beginning of the meeting. Hello, my name is, what's your name? What part of Berks County are you from? Have a conversation on a normal human level. Build a little bit of a relationship, okay? And then stay tuned in. Now, it's pretty, and not raise my hand. I also said to myself, should somebody ask me a question, I will answer it genuinely from me. I will immediately turn around and say, and what is your opinion? Okay? And that's as far as I go. So I found that at every meeting I go to, and I do believe it, I do believe in each one of us, God dwells. And God leads us, and God opens a certain little space. And I only need a little space. One person at a time is enough, all right? And I will genuinely listen and respect them. Now what I find is that as here we are, all Christians gathered together, they are all people of a certain mind.
We're not all Christians.
Oh, I'm sorry, we're not, I'm sorry. We're all God-believing. I don't know either, I'm sorry, I'm generalizing.
We're all people.
All right, I'm going with this Christian.
We're all people.
Thank you, thanks, Donald. All right, we have to deliver a deal with our humanity, I think, in a great deal of ways. And so whatever we go to a meeting, we have to be first a human being, and the other person a human being. And I have found, I've learned a lot. Each time I've gone, I've taken another little step braver, and on a one-on-one level, and then let it go. But I think we have to do something individuals to an individual respectfully.
Thank you.
So, Robert, you, I could never do that. But we did talk about finding common ground with people on the other side of this opinion of ours, of Christian nationalism. Finding common ground, try to speak their language if we're able to, and perhaps challenge them on Christian values, because sometimes it seems a little twerked, their Christian values. Sorry to go with Christian values, but that's what we were talking about. And we need respectful dialogue and conversation, which we can't do over Facebook. You know, right away I want to just say things that I don't want to repeat here in church. But also, I think we need to go out and vote. We should have universal access to college education. Not to counter who's already been indoctrinated, but to stop with this indoctrination so that people can recognize the BS when they see it and hear it, so that people have critical thinking skills. And I guess that's pretty much it, but I just want to say, as scary as it must have been for you to attend those meetings, I can't imagine how scary and intimidating it is for a Christian nationalist to come to the table with any one of us. And I hope we can get there soon.
Great, thanks. All right, on the front table here.
Two or three things. One, we talked about the symbolism that is sometimes in the church that identifies country and church, particularly flags up front. And the second was we talked about the idea of going through all of the ministries of the church, not simply a Sunday service, but children's kinds of ministries, other ministries of the church that can lead to a broader understanding of the world right around us.
Two more tables. Another one?
I don't know we came up with any answers, but we came up with some observations. Okay. One of them was that I think our temptation in dealing with this is to act out of our heads, to logic it out. But we recognize that so much of this sense of Christian nationalism is driven by emotion rather than logic. And so to the extent that we want to simply argue it out, argue it logically, counter the logic, it won't ultimately work. That ultimately what has to take shape is something more, to use a common word, pastoral. Something that addresses the emotions and the core values and to the extent you want to argue logic, argue definitions like what are quote unquote Christian values. Frankly, a lot of those values aren't uniquely Christian. They're spread out in pretty much every religious and non-religious tradition, and to recognize that starts to give the possibility to build bridges. And we talked about how, alas, we're not the only cultures dealing with this. We mentioned historically the whole thing with India and Pakistan and its various formations, the Israeli-Palestinian divide, but also right now the Israeli-Israeli divide around the issue of judiciary and what does it mean to be Israel, and in their case the dilemma, they don't even have a constitution that they can say, well, this defines it, but we did a lot of observing of the ambiguities around it, but didn't come up with hardcore answers.
All right, great, thanks. All right, last table. I've got a couple closing remarks. We'll get some lunch. Okay, nothing there. All right. Well, I'll just say a couple of closing remarks. Yes, go back. Yeah.
Just a story, and I've been thinking about this. When I was young, very young, we lived down Pennside, and on one side we had an immigrant Italian family. On the other side of us lived a Jewish family, and he was Rabbi Bennett of the Orthodox Church here in Reading at the time. And he had 3 children, and I got to know them, and we played together, and they used to invite me over for, a Friday evening dinner when they had their service, which was interesting to me. I mean, I don't remember a lot, but I do remember that. And the other family, they used to bring over pizza pie. That was the first time we had pizza. We weren't used to that. But I find that a lot of neighborhoods these days aren't integrated like that. There's not a lot of ethnic neighborhoods. It's either a Hispanic community. I think we do have more Jewish within communities, but there's not a lot of blacks. It's getting more and more interspersed with blacks.
but I think that's part of the problem too.
All right, thank you. Great, well, I started off by saying, the topic today has been Christian nationalism, but it's a very old problem, right, in the country, one that actually comes with the country, right, predates the country. And I think that I was kind of going to go back to this idea that one of the reasons why it's so visceral, right, is and I'll talk to the people who think of themselves as white and Christian in the room, is that, our ancestors really did think of this as their country, right? And we've got to kind of not, I think, it's easy a little bit to kind of push it to being out there and it's like those crazy people's problem, right? But to kind of take it in and look a little closer. So what does it mean, for example, if your church has a stained glass picture of a white Jesus hanging, if it's 100 years old and it's Tiffany glass, it is still white Jesus, right? In the church, what does that mean? If I think that often you mentioned children's material, right? This table over here. I think the children's material in many white Christian churches is some of the worst on this, right? Those Bibles, those children's Bibles, nothing but white people in those children's Bibles, right? And a lot of the kind of materials that get put up, they get used. It just reinforces this idea that, whether it's David or Adam or Jesus, right? I mean, they all look like Paul Revere, right? And that's the kind of thing that you get, or George Washington. It looks like European people, right? Populated the Bible all the way back, and so that idea. And I think the other thing to kind of remember with this is I do think it's sometimes easy to kind of keep it out there. Although I appreciate the kind of Patriots example from here in this county, but I think for those of us who think of ourselves as white and Christian, there are lives at stake here, and I think we've got to remember that, right? When we see rising anti-Semitism, hate speech, rising anti-black attitudes that are just out there now, we're beyond the age of the dog whistle, right? We are in the age of the megaphone. And that means something, right? And it means that I think one of the biggest challenges that I'm just kind of taking the temperature of the room here and talking with Steve is that there's many people who think of themselves in this room as being kind of fine, progressive, enlightened Christian people, right? And not those kinds of Christians. But I think the real challenge is that for many young people today, and we're seeing, like, for example, young people headed for the exits of churches, right, in droves, right? So for example today, among Americans between the ages of 18 and 30, 38% of them claim no religious affiliation whatsoever. Right. 38%. Right? And that is, we've never seen a generation like that. If you take the boomers back into their 20s, only 12% of the boomers in their 20s claim no religious affiliation. Right, so this generation is 3 times as likely as any generation we've ever seen not to claim any religious affiliation. Most of them have parents or grandparents who were Christian, right? And part of the reason why they left is that the version of Christianity they see in the public is not one they want to be anywhere near associated with. And so I think the big challenge, going forward is, if we want a kind of Christianity that we can feel good about and that we feel like is consistent with democracy, like, we're going to have to stand up, right? I think we're used to being comfortable, we're used to being, silent, but at this point, I think we are at this great moment of reckoning, right? I think between COVID, the Black Lives Matter movement, I've never seen anything like the moment we're in, right? In my 30 years of observing kind of American religion and politics. Like, this is truly, I think, a different moment. Now, I wasn't alive in the 60s, so I might have felt like that then there. But I do think we're at the kind of this other turning point in the country. And these next 10 years, I think in particular, are going to be really critical for the country. And whether there are robust democratic institutions that are left to hand down to the next generation is going to depend on what we do, I think, in the next 10 years. And the kind of sitting idly by thing and kind of shaking our heads and rolling our eyes, I think, is not really going to cut it over the next 10 years. So I'm kind of part of my own journey, and I think it's kind of just issuing this call, really to stand up and to realize that, like, look, it's not only like, do we have something at stake, but still as this very large kind of group in the country, we've got to stand up for our black and brown brothers and sisters. We've got to stand up for our Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, other brothers and sisters. We still have a voice, and for those of you who are Christian and look like me, we are the most likely people to stand up and be a countervoice, right, to that. And we shouldn't leave that to other people who are actually under threat. So I will leave it with that, and we will have some lunch.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Is anybody hungry? Yes. We're glad to have Cafe Esperanza cater our lunch today. I want to ask you, do you know who Bon Jovi is?
Yes.
Okay. Over in Toms River, New Jersey, he has a restaurant that is Pay What You Can. There's about 100 restaurants in the world that are Pay What You Can. Hope Lutheran Church and its supporters are right up the block here, and Cafe Esperanza is trying to do just that. Pay what you can. Mary Wolf will share that with you, and then we'll have a prayer, and then we'll eat.
Well, hi, everybody. It's great to be here. This is my second time in a few months to get to cater an event here. We had a great time preparing for you all. I'll just tell you a little tiny bit about the cafe so that the soup doesn't get cold. But as Bruce said, we're a Pay What You Can cafe. We're open, I have cards in one of my pockets. I'll get them. We're open 7 to 3, 4 days a week. Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. You can't be open Tuesdays because we have a food pantry in our parking lot. And so the city said, no, that's just too much traffic in that neighborhood. And people come in and can either pay a little bit for their meal, they can pay a lot and pay it forward for what they think the meal is worth. And we have plenty of people that come in and don't pay anything at all. Every morning we get a gaggle of about a dozen school kids from the middle school bus stop, which is right up the street. They're all on their way to Central Middle School, and they come in and we feed them scrambled eggs and French toast and bagels with cream cheese, and a lot of them take extras along to their friends on the bus, and they always take a coffee for their bus driver. That's how we start our day at Cafe Esperanza. Our food is as local, organic, and seasonal as possible. I know for a fact that everything in the salad, including the croutons and the 2 dressings, are all organic. But not local at the moment, because we don't really have too many sources for local vegetables. Our soups today are broccoli cheddar, which is vegetarian, French lentil vegetable, which is vegan, and creamy tomato basil, which is vegetarian, but not vegan. So the only one that's vegan is the lentil vegetable, and there are signs that tell you what's in everything. The brownies are gluten-free. The strawberry oat muffins are dairy-free. Banana bread is vegetarian, but not vegan. The blueberry muffins are regular, and the chocolate chip cookies are regular. Everything, all the baked goods were baked this morning, so they might even still be warm. So we invite you to come sometime, and I see some of my better customers around the room, so you can talk to them, but we would love to see you. Oh, okay. So, yeah, one of the things we do to support ourselves, but also to support other people, is we have these wooden nickels. We ask for a $10 donation for the wooden nickel, and it has our address and our name on one side, and on the other side it says it's good for one meal. So sometimes people don't feel like they can come in and just get a handout, but then they know that somebody paid for their meal, so they can come in and they can turn this in. I mean, we'll feed them whether or not they have a nickel. But this sometimes is easier, and it gives you something to do when somebody says, I'm just hungry. And if they won't take this, then they're not just hungry. So, we know that's also the case with many people. There's a basket here for donations if anybody wants to donate to the cafe. We survive on patrons' donations, and we write a lot of grants, and we have a lot of support from various churches. I know that the UCC conference in this part of the county has supported us. I'm a Lutheran pastor. The Lutheran Church has supported us in major ways over the years, and we are open to any kind of help, volunteer help. Just let me know. You can also Venmo us. And checks. So anyway.
Thank you.
Yeah.
How about, let's pray.
And we need to see that.
You wanna do it? You want me to do it? Let's pray. And you know this community is grieving of the loss of 7 lives in the explosion in West Reading. That community is gathering together tonight at the fire company in West Reading. At 7:30, they're gathering before that. Hopefully rain will hold off because everyone who wants to walk there. West Reading has always been a walking community. Palmer Candy is an 80-year-old company in which many of the employees always walked there. And so we need to pray for that company as well, as they lost all their administrative offices. That's going to be the biggest factor going forward, how they're going to recover with their 850 employees. So let's have a moment of silence, then we'll pray. Gracious God, we give you thanks for your blessings in our lives. We pray that you would be the community that is grieving the loss of loved ones. We give you thanks for the service of first responders. We give you thanks for this opportunity to gather in fellowship today. We give you thanks for the research that's going into helping us with this major concern in our country. And now be with us, bless this food, and continue to bless our fellowship. We pray these things in the strong name of God. Amen. So please come forward, give us a minute to get the other soup on.
One quick thing, I was just reminded that today is National Trans Visibility Day, as I was talking about standing up. At the end, I just want to make sure I mention that the attacks we're seeing on transgender people in this country are absolutely connected to this white Christian nationalist.
This evening at 5:30, the community is gathering at City Hall for the raising of the transgender flag. You're all invited.
Great. Great.
Robert, nice to have met you. Thank you. Nice seeing you.
I'll be there in time.
When are you going to get bored anyway?
Yeah, I know. I'll cover it
How is that?
Yes, we did. You live in town. Yep. There's a mother or grandmother in your life. Right. Okay, and we were gonna get together, but never happened. So you owe me a contact. Do you have my card? Do you have my card?
I do.
Tell me about you.
So I am organizing probably
She's trained to you.
yes. I'm working right now. This is what you have it on. I would love to share. After the way that you are
I'm a lawyer, I'm a yoga teacher, I'm a writer, I'm an activist. What to say? I also in the LGBTQ activist work that I do. I've done it heavily in very conservative campus ways. You're in the Dynasty of Allentown. It's 5 counties. I'm out in the Dynasty of Allentown and continue to work on the bishop, the chaplains, the principals, to where to
No, I was at the town, but I did it with AS media. They do a lot of work with the data. They're usually the person that's coming in and filming.
Gotcha.
Wait a minute. Take one of those bowls. I'll get that. Don't worry about it.
I just moved into Center Park. Okay, I'm here in Center Park as well.
This is where you need trays.
Where I have my focus.
I could move over here.
So 819, you know the property that has like the grass and the house with the porch. Oh, I have an orange too.
You need a tray.
I just I'm very happy. It's a very electric
Are you with Kristen Bell?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, they have a number of people.
Yeah, they do. I'm in one. That house that I live in is built as a private residence. It's been divided up. I'm on the first floor rear in what was the owner's apartment. There's a certain elegance to it.
We actually were on the second floor, right next to Kristen Bell.
Oh, okay. Isn't
Aaron and Paul are now right.
So right next to Chris, who's there?
So Chris and Bill are the last house, and it's 725, and Penny lives on the first floor, and Mark lives on the next floor on the other side of the wall. There's a private residence, an apartment, and that's where Aaron and Paul, and they're at, I think that's 50 on the second floor, and then we're at 713, and that slowly gets.
To meet some of your neighbors. This is Robert Metzger.
Hello.
He's on 5th Street. She's on next to Crescentville. And this is Maria. And this is Ezra. Ezra, you're in downtown Reading as well.
Maria's on Douglas.
Oh, okay.
So we're the Center Park lot field.
Pretty much.
Franklin? 500. So right near the public library.
And I'm also the organizer for Berks Stands Up.
Oh, are you?
Yes. So Jane retired a couple of years ago, and I was the state organizer.
I don't have a card. I'm not an adult. You need a card.
But you're with Berks Stand Up.
Yes. What do you do? You are. Okay, good.
Yeah, if you write out last year, we did the launch for home care here in our park. That's what we worked on. Really strong enforceable disorders to get it passed last year for $125 million in the budget. Now this year, we're coming back and we're asking for $300 million and for a permanent source of funding for the state. Everybody has access to the whole home repair program. So the whole home repair program is a statewide program that came out of ARPA funding. And what it does is it provides a $50,000 grant to homeowners under a certain income level to make the necessary repairs to their home. So that they, I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but we will have it. We're having an info session on whole home repair where we present all of that on the 10th on Zoom.
Does that have anything to do with neighborhood housing
It is likely not connected to that. This is a state program.
Yeah, please do.
But it's possible that they'll get connected into it at some point. Yes. So it is being run for the county by the Berks Redevelopment Authority, and they are re-granting the funds to Habitat for Humanity for the Reading area, specifically for the city of Reading. It also includes, there's funding within this to provide job training
So young.
so that we can train young folks on the skill sets and the jobs that we need locally, so they, one, have a well-paying job to sustain a family here, and we have people in the trade that can maintain our homes. Because we have a very high concentration of historical homes.
Tell me about it.
Yeah.
Time work with code services.
Yeah, it's very expensive.
One of
That's
the
another
next
reason.
time that get near us, one of the
Oh, I heard. Yeah. Yeah. So that's one aspect, and this is just the first step for us in terms of tackling the housing crisis in Pennsylvania. We know that the fact that it only hits certain people under a limit of income, it's just one piece. We can't make the major changes all at once, but we're going to keep moving at every step we can. Some of them might. Even when they're making a lot of money, it can still be very expensive to repair some of them.
Oh, I know.
Yeah. We have a housing team that would that be something you might be interested in coming to?
I'm gonna write a course. You can look for it. Good, I'm glad you did.
Robert's on the 500.
So many. And some of them are due.
So we're doing an info session for home repair on the 10th. Our next housing meeting is going to be on the 9th. But would you mind if I actually got your information? And that is, that's my cell phone.
What building is 201?
That is the golf.
Okay, so you have all this in there.
Yeah, we are right here. Right. Yeah, we're like right around the corner. If you're taking.
And for what organization?
What's on April 10th?
April 10th is the information session where we're gonna. It's gonna be
Architectural bank.
It'll be virtual on Zoom. Virtual. It'll be online. Yes. And I'm more than happy to help you get situated so you can go. If you want to give me your information, I can reach out to you and help you get set up to join for that. We are also going to have have a day of action, again, like we did last year, but this time it's going to be at City Hall on the 17th of April. Don't work on the good stuff there anymore. Yeah, thank you. I think my mom is a bit of a sympathist. She was here briefly and she left. And it's a long-term conversation. I grew up in Berks County. I'm the only one in my family. They all the rest of them were born in New York. And she's very religious, and it's kind of trended in the wrong direction. And I think a lot of it has to do with my father. A bad dad, to put it nicely. And it's influenced her a lot. And so I've been working, just having very slow conversations about this. The view that I have of my mother growing up as a Christian does not align with the things that she believes now and the things that she engages with now. I don't think that it's really her. And if it is, that's a bigger problem.
Well, my friend that just left, he said, one of the things he would like to talk about is what it means to be Christian and white nationalists, or even just Christian nationalists. One from the United States. That's the way I see it.
I do a lot of reading into our Christian history.
So you're conflicted.
Ideas, concepts are brought to us. I don't think that a lot of them realize and recognize that abortion prior to the 1950s and 60s was not a concern.
It wasn't a big deal.
Yeah, it was made into a culture war, and they don't have that historical context. I didn't have it growing up until I moved out and met different people and found resources. And it's difficult to get through that. Yeah, because it's the thing that is. She said to me one time, "It's like it just seems like you hate America." It's not completely wrong. It's just that I'm incredibly disappointed that all of the things they taught me as a child weren't necessarily true, and they hid so much information. And it's hard to be proud of a nation that is just so antithetical to the vision of it that they painted.
Well, I think well, of course, slavery
No, I here, take my card.
Yeah.
but it's not.
I have yours.
It is.
But that's
what I want to do. It's like I have faith that we can get to that point. But
She got up to speak at the podium.
we have to push hard, and it's going to be uncomfortable for a lot of people. It's hard and it's worth it.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I'm grateful to have seen a lot of cases I didn't know here, and also a number of folks that are in the older generation.
Do you remember the lady from Berks
Don't see it
Barnes, the
super
writing
often.
group with the long hair?
But it's good to see a large group of people out.
Yeah, it was nicely done. Thank you for coming over.
Yeah, thank you for the work you're doing.
Thank you, and thank you for being here.
And we need more affordable housing.
Oh, yes, we do.
We need affordable housing for various seniors. I think we need it for.
Yeah.
I don't even know if it's affordable.
Well, I think we're getting the last of the affordable housing with Chris and Bill and Redding. to be honest.
And I'm not sure it's all that.
I know. It was much more affordable when I first moved in.
How long have you been in there?
We just moved into 713 from 725 about a month ago. We were in 725 for about 8 years. So when we moved in, it was 725 a month for the whole floor basically. And now it's
Everybody has eaten, so please come get some more if you would like, or try a different one.
They just redid a lot of the woodwork and piping for the bathroom in our place because it was starting to degrade. So I know the rent for us isn't going to go up for another 45 years based on that.
Given the history of increases,
Yes.
I'm gonna get one.
You probably won't see one for at least 2 years if you just moved in.
I moved in, I'm like a year and a half, I'll be 2 years in October.
Yeah, probably another year and a half.
I hear it could be coming in July.
Yeah, usually that's when they do it, they send out a letter. It's only ever gone up 25 per year, and we only got a raise about 3 times over our 8 years.
But you don't get from 725 to just $25.
Yeah, it was just a $25 increase each time they increase. So they never go like a major jump. It's always been a very small increase.
But how do you get from 725 to 1200 with $25 increase?
Because we moved into a new, we left our old one and we moved into a new one. They had just done more work. It has a big, it's the one that has the laundry in the basement. And we have a direct.
Everybody said that was left. And you're happy in your space?
Oh yeah.
I'm happy in mine.
Yeah, it's beautiful. There's so much sunlight. We've got a backyard now.
I'm very happy in mine. Yeah, keep up the good fight.
Thank you. Really nice to meet you all. I'll be reaching out. I'm looking forward to getting to know you better.
All right, thank you.
So how was the soup?
Good. I had the
It's not just good. That's what I would get.
Yeah, me too.
Excellent.
Let's got good protein. How is nice.
Yeah, you go down there quite a bit. You go to her.
I wouldn't say quite a bit, but I have.
You were telling me when it was closed?
Yeah,
Oh,
that's
no, I did go in one time.
He's so young. I think he's Jamie's neighbor. Jamie Raskin's neighbor. I should tell him to say hello to Jamie. I haven't seen him in a couple of years, but he's on Cape Cod. I met him on Cape Cod. He's a cousin of a friend of mine. That's how I know him. Do you want to join us? Oh, okay.
He's smaller than I thought he was. Irish name, sir, the Romans thought you could swing that cat without hitting a minister.
No.
I probably the Romans crawling with that part of ministry.
Yeah, you're getting to realize
Yeah,
that.
crawling.
Very good. Excellent. Excellent.
Yeah, I didn't make it.
It's very, very good.
I know, it's very good.
Ministers very well fed, don't you think? All the ministers look very well fed.
This time I called the council president and said, you can't come in the council. They get me on the side.
Thanks for coming. Good to see you. Good to see you.
Very nice to see you. Donald, Maria.
Molly,
I don't know. I'm not here. I think we're both hit with the season. But on my schedule is to pick the baton up, go to Staples,
They decided this.
imported printed material for the van, go bring it around, post it, distribute it, check out the ice cream place in downtown for an event, maybe. While we're doing that, hit the transgender thing at 5:30. Steve's, I saw a picture of Steve's wife. I'll show you. She's cute. I saw Steve today. I said, your wife's cute.
She and I will walk down there
And he may be from an evangelical congregation. He might be. He could be. I sort of got a dirty look when I said the number.
No, and when you said something else, you had your back turned.
I'll show you. I think the reason that table had nothing to say, they may be a group of patriots and evangelicals. This is not. Oh, she is? She is cute. And it tells their little life story.
You gotta work hard to be able to.
Through university, 2 adult children.
I knew some people that taught there. Is this yours?
No, he has it out to show people.
Oh, he doesn't have copies.
No, he only has the one.
She looks a little like Tina.
A little bit.
A little.
It's over here on the second page too, but there's only one copy. Yep.
More than 30 years.
That's interesting. I'll put it back. This thing is so much in the way.
Oh my gosh.
Right in front of my face.
What church
Are you the minister?
Epler's UCC in Leesport.
Oh, I know that. I'm Donald, by the way.
Hi, nice to meet you.
What kind of congregation have you had?
A great one.
No, but I mean, is it, what congregation?
UCC, United Church.
I run in Roman Catholic circles.
Okay.
I try to make the Roman Catholic world more loving and welcoming to LGBTQ. Some people say UCC is way ahead of us.
Which I'm very proud about.
Good.
Although we're not all perfect or as good at the UCC. Yeah, you know
How old are you?
Literally.
38.
Lady, I was going to offer to help you with your homework.
I get that a lot, and you know, I've been in ministry for 12 years now. I've been at Epler's for 9, almost 10, and I've got an 8 and 10-year-old at home, and my wife and I both look very young, so we get that whole, you know.
So I would snake up
Absolutely. Yeah, 1737 is when the church was started, but our building is 1863 is our sanctuary. So.
And where is it?
In Leesport. So if you're by,
aren't you on the canal?
no, we're off of West Leesport Road. If you know where the Harley Davidson is, we're up to the street from there.
So by the farmer's market.
Yeah, well, we're on the other side. Epler's.
Oh, you're in Apple.
EPLERS.
Yeah.
Go north on 180 to the Wawa, turn right.
It's always turn right at the Wawa. Yeah, that's right.
We are not.
Go to Turkey Hill.
We had conversations back in 2014
Up over the hill.
about same-gender marriage, and that was an affirmative vote, but we never went through any official process. Our organist is a very openly gay black man, and Brian Gibson.
Brian.
Yeah. So, you know, we do have some people who love color and you know, diversity in our congregations, but we've never gone through that process. But we're a loving, welcoming, open congregation.
Okay. Would there be any, like, I would send in
Oh, yeah.
there wouldn't be any.
No.
Okay.
Who are you?
I'm Janice.
Janice, my wife.
Oh.
I thought you, I came in the midst of the conversation.
I don't know that I've ever met you.
Agreed. Pray for him. I'm in his community practice.
Right here.
Thursday.
Yes, we know each other pretty well, actually.
That's good, that's good.
I don't know if that's good or bad.
We played golf.
That's true, that's true.
Once.
Each other and you committed.
Oh, I gotta do it.
Yeah, we like each other, okay.
That's good.
Actually,
Okay. Of course, like whatever. Yeah.
and go. Well, the responses are different.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're fine.
Right.
I do too.
So Janet, are you looking to leave him and come somewhere else and you'd like to go down?
No, I
Well, that's not me, but it's...
Oh, I know. But you feel one of the guys.
Right, a young guy.
No, that's right now. That's the read. What's the number? Show me the number. I can tell you what it's read.
I said I want to go.
I know.
Well,
said, I know what the Chicago one is. You didn't say, oh, I want to go.
Well, you can see our new offices. But I just wanted to get, we have plenty of flags, we just haven't put them together.
You didn't see any past ones.
I don't have time, but I want to.
That's, I'll fix it.
Be out there. Thank you. Inside? All right.
That's really the biggest challenge. John Holt, Linda Kowalski, and Kevin, the guy.
That's gotta be rehab. Either that or some mental health, and that's another whole life. But PA's, that's gotta be rehab because
That church, and I know, and my parents are still members of it. Even though my dad's a pastor serving the school bowl, you know, they're still members there. So I said, you know, that you find this as a conflict. I don't think it's a problem. You know, very much confidential things, but it is. It's actually it's very similar to talking about
maybe they
where I'm talking about a person. You know, I was there 38 years ago.
Yeah.
This is an interesting thing. I know it's like ready.
I would check. I think that's where it's actually.
From my church, she's on the school board for Silver Valley. And so, like, you're talking about sports and stuff like that. Yeah. But she said, someone has a black policy that works. Now, technically.
Been there, done that one already.
Sean.
I remember that.
Do we actually have anybody else? But I'm just not thinking.
Good to see you.
So, like, we don't even.
Yes.
Which doesn't help.
Right.
But she asked for me, like, where she's at.
Here.
I heard that. Get the word out. Right. But, like, you're right. If we are all, like, but that's great. But in order for us to have a dialogue and conversation, the other.
Yeah.
Alright, take care. Yeah, whatever. The next one I think we'll meet on Zoom, and then in May we'll see about getting together. Yeah, because I'm a part of that. I'm in his group, so. Absolutely. I mean, Kevin has to come far, but I'm fine with that. Yeah, it's great. It's a great place.
I've been there once with the
Okay.
It's great.
Yeah, we can look about doing that in May, absolutely.
Oh, you know what?
Okay, well, we can change it. I was gonna say, I don't know, when am I covering for you?
Oh, you left me.
They tried.
Oh no, I'm back. I'm out at 12. Forget I even said that.
Hey, trust me, I know. I I'm the same thing.
Good, how are you doing?
It was nice to have Kim here. Have other
But Bob and I were just talking about, like, you're all like-minded people, and that doesn't help. Yes. Yeah, Linda, she said, she's like, how do we advertise? Like, because there are no people of color here, just because it's a white nationalist issue, it's still. It's true. Well, but Bob and I just said that, like, I have a couple people of color in my congregation, only one who's really active, but our pastors, Sean Brown is the only one I could think of that is a person of color, really. There's some that yeah. Oh, that's true. But they are down in Philly and not up here. Like Hugh Hedrick when I was probably and there was some that went to Penn Northeast. It was a husband and wife. I can't think of what their name was. Oh yes. He was a moderator for a while. So like, do they even, when? Too. If anybody ever what? It would be, it's true. It would be, you take care. It would be hard.
I'll see you Monday.
Just like it would be hard for LGBT. It's seriously.
See you, Charlie. Say hi to Patsy.
Take care. I'll do that box. See you sometime. Take those out. I'm going to head out too. Yes, you too.
Thank you very much.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
I mean, like, what am Oh, where's Linda? That's there.
The bowl is all the way at the end for silverware.
Oh, that's right. She did it.
Yes, that was several, I guess.
Thank you. Thank you.
Her husband, or not her husband. So her husband.
Yeah, he said he wants to finish what he's doing. I
Steve's not